Hello, hello everyone. It's me, Arden Lee. I am back with another video, and today the topic that I want to talk about is the stories that we tell ourselves. And if this is something that sounds interesting to you, by the way, this is a lot of what we deal with in my course, The Repatterning Project. And if you want to find out more about that, you can go to this description box and you can click on a link to a free PDF guide to the repatterning modalities so you can see what it is we do in that 8-week course, that 8-week incubator where we get together to change our thoughts and our beliefs to optimize our lives for happiness and success, and how we do that. I also work with people one-on-one, so if you have a problem and you don't want to wait until January 20th, which is when our next incubator begins, then reach out, get in touch with me. You can join the Repatterning Parlor on Facebook. It's the Facebook group that I moderate. So there's also a link to that in the description box. So go ahead and click that link, answer the 3 simple questions, and join the group, and definitely get in touch with me there. I would love to be of service to you if that's something that I can help you with. So what am I going to talk about today? I'm going to talk about the stories that we tell ourselves. This is a pretty big topic, and I'm sure that I will revisit this one a great deal. But the more and more that I do work in this realm, the more and more the importance of our stories comes up for me and proves itself time and time again. So many of our beliefs and our thought patterns are essentially stories. Essentially stories are, a bunch of beliefs kind of strung together. And especially the stories that we take on for our own lives, the archetypes we take on for our own lives. I am this kind of a person, I behave in this kind of a way, and this is the narrative that I am currently in. We have our capability of changing those things. We absolutely have the power to stop identifying with the stories that are unhealthy for us and to choose new ones from the entire ubiquitous universal library of stories and archetypes. Whatever suits us, we can absolutely start to change the way that our lives look based on the stories that we live under. We don't like to think about this a lot because it doesn't sound like those things are things that are under our control, that are under our power. And certainly, there are a lot of realities in this world that are not under our control. There are a lot of issues of systemic oppression and privilege and lack thereof that certainly I don't want to gloss over. However, everyone can use the power of stories and the power of narrative to start changing their lives in some way. So even though we may all start off in different places, and we may be born into different amounts of power and control and wealth and abundance and resources, we definitely all have the ability to choose the stories that we tell ourselves about our lives and about what everything means. And the more and more that I do this work, the more and more that I am seeing that is really the key. That is really that's the key to unlocking our lives and starting to create our lives from that empowered place, where we can come to really create our realities for ourselves. So when I start thinking about that, I think one of the most powerful, the biggest chunks of that is our narratives, is the stories that we identify with throughout our lives. And I'll get into what I mean by that in a second. But when I say that they're the biggest chunk, what I found is that those stories that we start to identify with carry so many beliefs and patterns in them. They're like a package. It's almost like you signed up for a subscription service or whatever, and your story comes to you and there's like a whole box of stuff in it that is about this story. And in a way, I feel like I even mean that literally too, because we end up with so much stuff in our lives that reinforces our stories. And sometimes those are things that we're choosing for ourselves. For those of you who've been able to see sort of some of my living room in the background, hopefully you can tell what story I'm choosing for myself. I'm very happy with this one at the moment. I love the atmosphere that is in my home when people come into it. And I have another video on this channel about how to create a home that you love. So if that calls to you, definitely check that one out too. But a lot of people are not making conscious decisions about their stories, and are not choosing their stories and everything that comes along with them from that place of empowerment. And I know that for me, for a long time, I was not doing that either. Or there were times that I was, and I thought that maybe I was, but the stories that I chose romanticized a lot of pain. So I'll get into some of what I mean by that. Right, when I was growing up, I wanted to be an actor and a singer, and I wanted to do plays and musicals and all that stuff. So it was very natural for me to identify with characters and with stories, because even in my teenage years, I was already becoming aware of what kind of stories and characters I was right for and what I was not a vibrational fit for. And so, for example, this did a number on my relationships for years, you guys. I'm not even joking about this. I was told by my voice teacher when I was growing up. He said, you have this really haunting, deep alto voice, and this really this you're this dark brunette. You're not suited to play, the blonde soprano who just, kind of ends up marrying the guy at the end, like, marrying the librarian, or, those types. You're meant to be, and this is the words that he said. He's like, you're meant to play like a witch singing to her dead child, which sounds weird, but that's, there is a witch singing to her dead child in Stephen Sondheim's Into the Woods, which was played by Bernadette Peters, and she's so great, right? But so I started to really identify with this kind of story. When I was 17, I was attending a summer arts program, and my friend and I decided to sing a duet from the musical Jekyll and Hyde. And sure enough, there's the good girl and the bad girl in Jekyll and Hyde, just as one's Jekyll's girlfriend and one's Hyde's girlfriend, and guess which one I was, right? And she's Lucy. She's this cabaret dancer, sex worker who is in a very dangerous environment, and who ultimately gets, attacked by Hyde in this crazy kind of like passionate, lustful, but unhealthy power relationship that they have. And she ends up, spoiler alert, she ends up murdered by him before the end of the play. So in taking this on, and there I was with my like very cute petite blonde friend singing like the nice girl part, and there I was singing the haunting dark alto, who was very, and I think that I think one of the things that drew me to that was that they were so much more interesting. They were such more interesting roles. There was so much more nuance and pain and complexity and sadness and hope and despair than someone who just sort of seemed from the narrative to sort of have it kind of easy all their lives, and just the guy just shows up, and then there they are, and they just get married by the end, and that's it. So certainly if you're playing a role as an actor, that's great, but I really think that our stories, especially if we're people who are especially energetically susceptible to narrative magic, which I have found that I certainly am, we end up taking on these stories and acting out these roles in our lives, sometimes without knowing it. And sure enough, in my 20s, I ended up being, I was a professional dominatrix, so I was a sex worker. I was a burlesque dancer, so I was a cabaret girl, and I was in an abusive relationship with someone who had a power dynamic with me, and eventually, very briefly, tried to kill me. So, I'm noticing that that all these ways, all these roles I played, all these stories I identified with, were showing up in my life. I played Lola in Damn Yankees, who's a woman who sells her soul to the devil in order to become the most attractive woman in the world, because she doesn't feel like she's good enough. She feels like she's unattractive or whatever. And I think in many ways that one showed up for me too, in the sense that I, in many ways, in becoming a pickup artist and penning my book, The New Rules of Attraction, while I don't regret that, it was certainly a choice to sacrifice my authentic expression in favor of an archetype that would be perceived as attractive. So in a weird way, that was kind of metaphorically, that was sort of selling my soul to the devil for a specific means, in order to bring about that that demonic work on earth. I'm kidding. I'm not demonizing my years in seduction like that, but certainly I sacrificed my authenticity in order to engage in that energy of temptation and forbiddenness and all that, all that fun stuff, all that taboo stuff that we love to play with, and it is what it is. But I just want to, I want to point out how powerful those stories are. And so what I want to invite you to do is really look at the stories that you're telling yourself and the stories that you're identifying with. I want you to watch for when you watch movies and figure out like which character are you identifying with on screen. And this is also why it's so important, you guys. We talk about diversity in Hollywood, and diversity in Hollywood, the kinds of stories, it's getting better and better now, but the kinds of stories that are told in Hollywood, really tend to favor those who have, certain kinds of privilege, racial privilege, beauty privilege, etc. And being able for, especially during our formative years of development when we're children and teenagers, to be able to see ourselves represented in positive manners on screen is really important to us. We need to know that we can have stories about ourselves, not that we're just a supporting character in someone else's story. I'm friends with a man who is a dating coach, and he's an Asian man, and he specializes in coaching Asian men to overcome their own stereotypes that they've internalized from so many stereotypes in the world, but especially in Hollywood, where they've come to look at, the Asian man as being like the quirky friend who doesn't have a lot of sexual attraction, going for him or whatever, because that's the way that so many Asian men have been put into our stories in Hollywood in America. And that whole campaign, that whole Twitter hashtag campaign of starring John Cho was so revolutionary for that reason, because there was someone who started photoshopping John Cho into all these like lead roles. He's a great Asian American actor, and why isn't he being cast in these more important parts? Because he could absolutely do like what Matt Damon does and what, John Cusack does or whatever. So again, that's the sort of social justice reason that our stories, having access to stories that are positive for all of us that we can identify ourselves in, is especially important. So that is important in the world too, right? It's important that we're advocating for that change. But in the meantime, don't let that stop you, because there is a whole like library of archetypes. Look, if you are someone who is in a marginalized culture who doesn't see a lot of films about you, either seek them out, advocate for them to be made, or even, turn to the mythologies of your own culture, of your own, like ask your parents to expose you to some of your culture's fairy tales, so you can see more of yourself in stories that are going to be useful for you, whatever you have to do, or, just put yourself into the archetype of another story anyway, something that at least feels energetically like it's a vibrational match for you. And look at, I look at those years that I was choosing stories where pain was really glamorized and romanticized, and I don't necessarily regret trying that out. I don't regret the years that I spent in that, because I came to this earth to play, and I came to experience all kinds of different experiences, and clearly that is one that called to me for whatever reason. But when I reached a point where I was like, I need to start actually getting into healthy relationships, and why do I feel like I'm so incapable of doing that, and I started to look at the stories I was telling myself and all of the blocks in there about my being the dark but traumatized, unworthy, impoverished, like the witch singing to her dead child and not the romantic heroine or whatever. And I started saying, no, I need to actually find roles that I identify with, archetypes that I identify with, where I can have healthy relationships and still be myself. I don't need to be a blonde soprano, but for one reason, I think that's why, there are certain archetypes that started showing up for me that made more sense for me personally, in order to create more happiness. I really love the movie Beautiful Creatures, for example. Beautiful Creatures is really, really lovely. It's a girl who's like dark and gothy and a witch, and she's kind of outcast. But she's still the romantic lead. The guy still really loves her and really goes out of his way for her. So, find them. They're out there, and be more aware of your stories and the stories that you're telling yourself, and ask them if they're helping you, and know that you can change the stories that you're identifying with at any time. You're going to want to do that purposefully and consciously. It's not going to just maybe happen overnight, but It absolutely is possible. Just keep reinforcing that to yourself. And thank you so much for listening. I hope this was helpful. Leave me some comments and let me know how it hit you. And I'll see you in the next video.